This time, we'd like to reconvene this meeting of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. Let me note for the record that all commissioners are present. When we left off for the recess, we had a motion on the table that had been placed there by Commissioner Forbes. Commissioner Forbes has requested to take some action regarding his motion before we move much further.
I was thinking, having heard my fellow commissioners, let me offer a slight variation on the motion. That rather than set Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, that kind of thing, that we agree that we will schedule 4 consecutive days, including the weekend. And that's leave it open. We can go either way as the situation warrants. The other thing that I would like to include in it is, again, looking at this calendar, I think that the weekend meetings should be in the same part of the state. I think being in one part of the state one day and the next part is not good planning. So I would like to revise my motion to that, and Commissioner Yao seconded it.
I'll second Commissioner Forbes' motion.
And Janice, could I have you read the motion, the amended motion back? I know.
That beginning in April, the Commission scheduled business meetings and input meetings for 4 consecutive days in the week, including the weekend, and that those weekend meetings should be in the same part of the state.
Yay. Well done.
The floor is open for discussion.
I just had a question for CCP, because I know that you had asked for maximum flexibility, and it sounded like the midweek dates you were choosing between were Tuesday and Wednesday, and I just wanted to confirm what I heard from Commissioner Blanco, that this is already based on input, because it sounded like you wanted to go back to certain regions and get more detailed input, perhaps?
Right. Well, yeah, I'd say it's both of those things. It's based on input, but we did want to do more, I guess, outreach once we started to announce the weeks and see what would be the best day. But we've already gotten some of them are based. It's kind of fluctuating.
The other thing I'd add is the concept for March and April, was this alternating north and south, and the assumption there was only 1 to 3 commissioners would be there. So we assumed the north commissioners would be going north and the south commissioners would be going south, and we specifically did that because we thought it would give you a break, so that rather than having to do 2 things in a row, the north people would have the other day off, and the same thing for the south. And also our concept or plan is that we would be having multiple teams out in the field. We have teams who are focusing on the north half of the state and the south. So for us, it would also be different staff. So that was the concept there. For June, if you look at the June calendar, that's when you see it notes at the top. It's just a north to south concept. And the only thing I'd want to clarify, just so we're all thinking the same thing, is when you talk about 4 consecutive days in the same area, are you then thinking that if you're in the San Diego region, you want to do 2 workshops in the San Diego region on different days, or are you thinking it's 3 days business meeting and 1 day input? That's what I'm trying to
I would like Commissioner Forbes to make that clarification.
Yes, at least in my mind, it was that we would have at least 2 input meetings, and they wouldn't necessarily have to be in San Diego. They simply would be in Southern California.
I see. So 1 could be in Orange County and 1 could be in San Bernardino?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And for clarification, too, I'm assuming these input meetings are not going to be a full-day thing, so
right.
We could double up in terms of it's not a 1 day here, 2 days there. It could be a combination. I think that it's the idea is to leave the flexibility to allow CCP to adjust as we need as we go on. We may have more or less need for business meetings and more need for input.
Mm-hmm. And we don't have to use all 4 days, per se. It's just they're available.
Commissioner Parvenu and then myself.
Okay. The amended version I'm a bit more comfortable with, and I still have an issue in terms of the structure of our meetings. I don't know if it's been concluded or determined whether our meetings will be some hybrid of a business meeting / educational meeting / input meeting. If that is the case, now if those meetings happen to fall on a Sunday or a Monday, then I still am restricted as to my attendance on Sundays and Mondays if we're including the business component with those. I would like to be to as many business meetings as possible and not be knocked out of the box on Sundays and Mondays. I'm far more comfortable with Wednesdays if need be, if we need to have one on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday and Saturday. Because it takes me time as a planner to 30 days notice and then 14 days notice. 14 days, 30 days I'm assigned a project, 14 days I have to give notice, and I'm stuck by our municipal code to hold on to those dates. So I can't just flip back and forth arbitrarily.
I had put myself in the stack after Mr. Parvenu. An additional observation and a consideration for CCP to take into mind is that I'm just imagining in Southern California, even though theoretically you could hold 2 input hearings in different parts of Southern California on the same day, the logistics involved in that and the traffic variables, it might be more reasonable to assume that we could squeeze in some hours of a business meeting that occurs in the same location as where we're doing the input hearing than to assume that we could actually do 2 hearings in the same day. That's just an observation and suggestion for consideration. Commissioner Anchetta, Commissioner Ward, and then Commissioner Forbes.
Well, I definitely agree that this amended motion is an improvement to the previous one, but just for clarification, is this a minimum in the sense that we are committed to 4 days, but we are flexible enough to schedule in any of the other 3 that might be available if we feel it's essential to do so for various reasons, including availability of the public on certain days when we're maybe not able to straddle certain weekends. That's a question, actually, for Commissioner Forbes in terms of...
I mean, this is just what it says. It's those 4 days, and the other 3 days are whatever happens. But and this was an effort to respond to a need, or a stated need for a specific schedule,
Sure.
and based upon what we had been handed.
Okay.
So this is only those 4 days. Other things would be as needed.
Okay.
Commissioner Ward?
Thanks. Just to direct it back at the motion, I think I understood. I think we're on the same page. The way I just understood the motion, it locked us into every time we want to schedule anything, it has to be for 4 days. I just want to make sure that the verbiage of the motion reflects that it gives us the flexibility to book if we decide 3 days is all
3 days, 2 days, 1 day. But I mean, if we have to put down his calendar, we need to direct staff.
There's only 7.
And we need to direct staff to, when to plan things. It's to create that structure. That's what it's for.
So an observation as chair is that the motion that's currently on the floor, what it in effect does is reduces the number of available days to us from 7 to 6. Correct? Because we're saying Saturday and Sunday, and then add 2 days on to the previous or to the end, which means Wednesday is the only day we're ruling out with the motion, if I'm understanding it correctly.
In absolute terms, yes.
Okay. Other commissioners who'd like to comment on the motion that's currently on the floor?
Yes, I would.
Commissioner Raya?
I'm going to vote no on this motion because I think it's just unnecessary. If what we're really looking for is flexibility, we don't know where we're going or when. Seriously, why do we want to tie ourselves to a formula at this point?
Commissioner Parvenu.
I agree. I'm available Sunday evenings. I'm available Mondays. I'm available whenever I'm available, but I cannot lock myself to a standing set row of days. I just don't want to tie myself to that degree.
So, Commissioner Blanco.
But we were willing to tie ourselves to these input and educational dates that were on this calendar, correct? Everything that was presented to us, right? And it was just when we started saying that we were going to add the business meetings, front or back, that people got uncomfortable. Correct? So can we agree on these dates that are on this calendar for whatever purpose they are?
So just to clarify, are you amending the existing motion that's on the floor? Because we do have a motion that's open.
I'm just
or just discussing it.
No, I'm just presenting, trying to elucidate what we're voting on, and that was just to prompt the discussion a little bit.
Thank you. Commissioner DiGiulio, and then Commissioner Yao.
I think we're just bogged down in a detail that maybe is unnecessary. Although the intention was very good to set something down, I think what we need to do is give a direction to CCP and not a. I think what they're looking for is, and it'll tell us which actual dates, is give us something so they can come back to us. That's my understanding. If we say we want to remain flexible, we want to meet the community's needs, we want to be in a region together, we want to keep our meetings together with our business meetings, our input, then have them come back with something. I think they need a little more. Maybe I'll just defer. I'm putting words in their mouth, but it seems to me we're talking about details. They're just, it's not helpful.
So, in order to deal with the motion that we have on the floor, Commissioner Forbes, does the motion still stand? Okay. Is there any further discussion on this motion that's on the floor? Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, I'm just curious. In the past, we didn't have the Google Calendar option, so it was necessary to coordinate amongst ourselves what our individual schedules were. We now have that in place, and I'm wondering, considering Commissioner DiGiulio's input, why we can't just task staff, be responsible enough to put our calendars up there and have them schedule the appropriate dates and times, and leave that as a staff function so that we don't have to keep being put in this position. With that tool in place, this seems to be a staff function to me at this point.
Commissioner Yao?
You may simply discuss the schedule for the workshop, or lack of it, or input meeting, without taking into consideration what we used to call the business meeting, and maybe in looking into the future, it's the mapping business meeting. I think we're putting the cart before the horse. I mean, the public outreach is an important function, but we need to do a lot of work associated with drawing maps and giving direction to staff. And we need, I think, fairly close to the entire commission in order to do that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think we kind of convince ourselves that instead of having a minimum number of people there, we need to be there in as many people as we can. And that being the case, if we have to travel on the day of the outreach meeting and stay overnight because the meeting doesn't end until 9 o'clock, and then waste another day to come home and have to do that 30 times, we're not going to have time to do the other important thing I think is more important than the outreach. Not that outreach is unimportant. It's just the fact it's just part of what we're responsible for. When you start looking at both of these requirements together, you have to make some decisions. And I thought the proposal was pretty reasonable. Try to group it together in any 4 days to the best that we can, and run with it. And if there's anybody that doesn't like the idea of grouping it together in 4 days, I guess this is time to speak up. But if you want to have separate meetings throughout the whole calendar, then voice it in that manner.
Commissioner Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make an alternate motion then at this time, that the Commission consider making scheduling of meetings a staff function, with consideration given that each individual commissioner is responsible to update their availability on the Google Calendar.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Parvenu. Janice, when you have a moment, could you read the motion back to us?
The amended motion is that the commission make scheduling of meetings a staff function, and that each commissioner will be responsible for their individual scheduling on the Google Calendar.
Floor is open for discussion on the alternate motion.
Just one point clarification. Janice, you had said amended motion. This is actually an alternative motion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a new motion?
It's a new motion, alternate motion. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. Please step up to the mic.
I'm sorry to interrupt the discussion. I just suggest when we're finished with this discussion, vote on the first motion first, and then on this motion to keep things clear.
Excellent. Thank you. So discussion is open on the alternate motion regarding staff scheduling meetings. Commissioner Baraba.
I would support this and I assume staff would then work with CPP on what's also appropriate for the people that we want to talk to, and balance our availability against what we could actually have a successful meeting.
Mm-hmm. Is there any further commission discussion on the alternate motion? Commissioner Parvenu and then DiGiulio.
Okay. Although this alternate motion doesn't specify the word meeting, it's in the prior motion is still ambiguous as to what this meeting is. Again, is it that hybrid business educational workshop input meeting, or is it just the educational public input meeting minus the business component? Or I still need to be clear what we mean by this word meaning. What have we as a commission determined that we will collapse these three functions during one session, or are we having our business meetings separate from the educational workshop / input meetings?
So I'd like to remind the commissioners that the discussion is open on the alternate motion. However, I will take pause so Commissioner Forbes can clarify his intent on the initial motion.
The intent was those 4 days are available for meetings. I'm not identifying what kind of a meeting it would be. Also, one point of clarification, there seemed to be a misunderstanding that I was implying that we could have 2 input meetings on one day, and that was not my intent. I thought they'd have to be separate days. I mean, you couldn't do 2 of those. But the idea was to create a block of time that we could plan for, because we'd also made the comment that we can't have our schedule driven by commissioner schedules. They have to be driven by a schedule. And we have to accommodate the schedule rather than the schedule accommodate us. And so it would be whatever meetings were determined to be appropriate for that day. It wasn't specific.
Thank you, Commissioner Forbes. Again, discussion is open on the alternate motion. Commissioner DiGiulio.
I would just like to see if Commissioner Ward would consider, I like the short, simple nature of this. I would wonder if you could consider that in addition to that, you might have parameters for consideration for staff when they're doing our scheduling, like maybe the idea of the 4-day block, that it some of the parameters that we have discussed that could be taken in consideration when the scheduling occurs.
Commissioner Ward.
I'd invite you to make an amendment to my motion. The way I see it is most everyone at this table has worked in professional environments, and this is just not a typical function for us. What I mean is with the tools that we had to do this initially, but we're using an old mindset. We're progressing past this, and I think it's an important step to be able to say, let's post it on the calendar. We're contracting with professionals that need to be in contact with staff. They understand the 14-day requirements, all those things in balance, and it absolves us of having to continually evaluate all of these things in an open public meeting. That's what staff's there to do, is support this commission in that way. I just don't think we're properly utilizing them. So I'd prefer to leave my motion like it is, but I appreciate the comment, and please invite you to make any amendments you see necessary.
I was just trying to envelop what some of the considerations in terms of combining business meetings and input for consideration when scheduling. I was just trying to encompass some of the other concerns, but I think it's fine just the way it is, too.
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco.
I call for the question.
So, at this time, we would need to take a vote on calling for the question. It would need to pass with 2/3. So, I'd like to do a hand motion. Do we have a second?
I'm sorry, what is the motion right now?
Call the question.
Call the question.
On Commissioner Forbes' motion.
And second.
Second.
Who made the motion?
Oh, yeah.
So at this time, I'd like to invite any members of the public who would like to comment on the motion, the first motion, which was made by Commissioner Forbes. Oh, on the...
I'm sorry. I hate to do this,
Okay.
point of order, but the motion on the currently on the table is Commissioner Blanco's motion to call the question, which is effectively end debate on the alternate motion. There needs to be, the comment can be to that motion, that gets voted on. If it's an affirmative vote, we can vote on Commissioner Ward's motion, whatever that outcome is, then we can get to Commissioner Forbes' motion.
Excellent. So what we'll need to do now is to move to a vote on Commissioner Blanco's motion to call the question. It would need to pass with a 2/3 majority.
And this is calling the question on the alternate amendment.
Closing debate.
Okay.
Closing debate. So could I actually have a show of hands on the motion that is calling the question? All those in favor say aye.
Point of order. I'm sorry. I don't think you didn't call for public comment, and then you can shut it down.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so I should call for public comment on the motion to
Then
call
just
the
close it,
question.
and then close it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would
All motions, you should be calling public comment.
Okay. Would any of our members of the public like to come forward and comment on our existing motion? Seeing none, we will call the question. All those that are in favor of calling the question, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion passes. At this time, Commissioner Anchetta, who is serving as our interim parliamentarian, I am assuming I am reverting back to the previous motion that was on the floor, which is actually Commissioner Ward's motion.
Right. So if there's any public comment on commission, because we've now closed the debate, but we do have to afford public comment, I believe.
I believe, if I may, our general counsel give different advice.
I believe the procedure we're using at this meeting, which is a correct one, is to give the opportunity for public comment before voting on each action of the commission. So this is appropriate time for public comment prior to your vote on this motion. Which motion? Well, I'd suggested that you vote on the motion that was first made by Commissioner Forbes first, and then on the subsequent motion.
And I would agree with that, because they are framed as alternate motions. They're basically equal at this point.
We wandered a little bit from perhaps perfect procedure when we did that, but I think if we keep them straight, we'll get the result.
In the order they were presented.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Excellent. So public comment is now open on Commissioner Forbes' motion, and actually, given all the conversation, could we just have a repeating of what Commissioner Forbes' motion was?
The motion was to, beginning in April, to agree to schedule 4 consecutive days, including the weekend, for meetings, and that weekend meetings should be in the same part of the state.
Thank you. Please come forward.
My head's spinning, and I'm sure yours is too. I'm Jim Wright. The nut of Commissioner Forbes' motion is that you should compress meetings into consecutive days and into geographically close locations. Fully support that. Think that's a great idea. Add that to the flexibility of Commissioner Ward's motion, and I think you've got something that works. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Any other members of the public who would care to comment on Commissioner Forbes' motion? Seeing none, we will go to a vote. I would like to do a roll call on this vote, please.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
No.
Commissioner Raya? No. Commissioner Parvenu?
No.
Commissioner Antai?
No.
Commissioner Galambas-Malloy?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
Yes.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
No.
Commissioner DiGiulio?
No.
Commissioner Dye?
No.
Commissioner Blanco?
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
No.
Commissioner Anchetta?
No.
Commissioner Aguirre?
What's the number? No.
The vote is 4 yeses, 10 noes, the motion fails.
So at this time, we will go to our next motion, which was introduced by Commissioner Ward. Could I ask for Janice to read back Commissioner Ward's motion, please?
Yes, to make scheduling of meetings a staff function and that each commissioner be responsible for scheduling their own schedule on Google Calendar.
Would any members of the public like to comment on this motion? Seeing none, I'd like to also do roll call on this vote.
Commissioner Yao?
No.
Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Commissioner Raya?
Yes.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Antai?
Yes.
Commissioner Columbus-Malloy?
Yes.
Commissioner Forbes?
No.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
No.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco?
No.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Anchetta?
Yes.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Yes.
That's 10 yeses and 4 noes, and the motion passes.
Excellent, thank you. So then how I'm interpreting what just happened here is that this provides the ability for staff to work with the consultants to come up with proposals on when things will be scheduled based on each commissioner providing their availability online, so that we can aim to meet whatever agreements we put forth around commissioner availability for those events. Commissioner Antai, I want to try and get a sense of what other action items that you need from us. One that is on my mind is, in order for us to continue working with CCP beyond the Saturday meeting tomorrow, that we need to, even if we do not approve this full scope, we need to identify pieces of the scope that we're comfortable with them moving forward on, so we can go ahead and approve that work and those budget amounts. Do you concur with that assessment, and do you have other action items?
I concur with that assessment, and let me elaborate on that. I would recommend that we make a motion to approve at least a minimum number of tasks so that we can give the consultants an opportunity to go back and finalize their contract amounts so that we can come back and hire them. Some of these items that I think needs to be approved by the board is the format that was shared with us. If we can all agree that that's okay, because it lists a number of tasks and assignments that the consultants would have to do. The tools, for example, that's part of that format. I think even with the mix of the educational and input meetings that we're now going to undertake, they're still going to have to use the same format and these same tools. So if we can give them direction to finalize their dollar amount, then we'll narrow down that scope.
Let me ask you an additional question, Commissioner Antai. Based on the nature of the conversation that you've heard today and the feedback that we've been giving, are you recommending, is your committee recommending for the commission to adopt this as it exists, or would you recommend any specific changes, given that you know the scope better than us, specific changes that would address some of the concerns that have been aired thus far today?
Well, I'm going to need some help with Sarah and Charlotte. So could you kind of elaborate how this would mix?
I'm sorry. I think
you could look at the summary page, and it could be a starting place for you to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that
What page is that on?
18, last page.
That the additional task or action item that we're considering now would be to kind of come up with a revised or alternate outreach plan. We definitely aren't going to start from scratch. We've done a lot of work, but and the principles are here. I think we need to do some more thinking about ways to fill in gaps if you're not going to hold the workshops, and where you should be putting resources, and do some more thinking around that. And that is a task that we do not currently have in this budget, and we would, like to do that soon, hopefully.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber and then Commissioner Dye.
Along those lines, it's been brought to my attention that there may be an alternative that could be a solution for everybody, and it will impact your, and as I understand it, proposal and contract. Given the Commission's urgency to move forward with input hearings, and given the lack of information that we have regarding when the RFP process is going to be completed and our ability to hire a technical expert, we have been constrained in our discussions previously that we would not be able to, or we're hesitant to proceed with input hearings without a technical expert. There is a possibility, as I understand it, that we can consider expanding the scope of CCP's work to include the technical expertise of Corinne McDonald for the Northern California, as if it was a separate contract, and possibility of the Rose Institute for Southern California, at least for a carved-out calendar, possibly for the month of April, or if we were to move the input hearings up into March, we can move forward now during the time in which we are awaiting the RFP process to play out. It's a nonpartisan, balanced approach that will achieve our intention to move forward with the input hearings. As I understand it, both of those technical experts can turn over any input information that they receive throughout the hearings to any technical experts who we end up hiring after the RFP plays out and an award is provided. And as I understand it, that would have to then be built into your CCP's proposed budget.
So the alternative that you're suggesting now is it would be a subcontract to these entities, correct?
Yes, and Mr. Claypool, if you could add anything to my understanding or misunderstanding?
No, and you're absolutely right. Right now, we have Doug Johnson and the Rose Institute providing a technical expertise for training under the outreach as a subcontractor. If we wish to, if you will, kind of morph this into the input meetings that I think that you believe you need to start gathering data, it's been suggested that these two contractors are more than capable of gathering the data in a form that could be transferred to whoever won the competitive bid, and that would allow you to begin your process that much sooner and essentially take this outreach process and turn it into outreach/input.
Commissioner Dye and then Commissioner Anchetta.
I do want to respond to that, but I was actually going to make a different suggestion, which was I think that in terms of getting to Commissioner Antai's objective here of paring down this the scope and the budget for CCP, I really think it's appropriate for our Director of Communications to really be overseeing the communications and outreach portion of this. To work with CCP and coming up with a plan in terms of what he would have them do, what materials he thinks it's appropriate for them to do. And I would like to defer to Mr. Wilcox to come up with that piece of it, to see what was originally envisioned as the educational workshops piece, to kind of execute the plan of coming up with a video and all that. I do think that will take more thought. It's not something that I think makes sense for us to debate here, but if we could give that direction so that that could be refined through our Director of Communications on that piece. In terms of responding to Commissioner Filkins-Weber, I know that there was a public comment about these particular contractors that this would not be a balanced approach, so I just wanted to acknowledge that here. I do know there's a desire to move quickly. I think that Mr. Claypool presented a couple of alternate options that we were going to proceed in parallel with the competitive bid process. So I guess I would just like to see where we are with that.
Commissioner Yao. Oh, Mr. Claypool, please respond, and then Commissioner Yao.
I'm sorry. Was I ahead of Commissioner Yao? Or? I'm sorry. I thought I was following Commissioner Dye.
You are correct. I apologize.
Is it
Mr.
possible to get
Claypool,
queued as
Commissioner
well?
Anchetta, and then Commissioner Yao.
Just a brief response. We are still waiting for DGS, as we're wont to do, to give us a response as to what those dates are. But those dates would certainly not compress to before April 1st, and this would allow this commission to start in March to collect information, and that was the thought.
Thank you, Commissioner Anchetta.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, and I'm not sure how in terms of the original suggestion of Commissioner Filkins, I'm not sure how I fall on that, but I think it's something to consider. I think it's a very interesting proposal. But I'm not sure how that affects the solicitation, the invitation for bids, because, and I don't think this was emphasized at the full commission meeting, but in the technical committee, advisory committee, we amended some language for clarity's sake in the invitation for bids to basically say that the technical consultant takes the Phase 2 element, which is the public input hearing process, and that is covered by the technical consultant. So I think what Commissioner Filkins-Weber is suggesting would in effect take out what is a big part of the original invitation for bid. So again, I have no problem if we want to do that, but it's breaking up the original contract, because again, if we look at it as Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, we're modifying Phase 1 significantly. Phase 2 and 3, I think, are in the major contract that we're trying to get. And what I'm understanding is that this proposal effectively breaks it up between Phase 2 and Phase 3, if I'm catching that.
And may I ask if Commissioner Filkins-Weber would like to respond to this question, and then Commissioner Yao.
Sure, just for clarification, all I'm suggesting is simply a technical expert to gather the data, capturing data at an input hearing for the month of April, because we don't know, well, or even considering moving up the input hearings into mid-March, while we're considering launching the educational component. So it's not a circumstance where we're separating the contracts so that the technical expert for input would only be these two providers. All I'm suggesting is that it could be a limited contractual agreement through CCP so you can move forward with the independent. But unless I must be misunderstanding. But that's my understanding for at least a carve-out of that process, that they could easily, the reason this came up is because I had suggested, and we've had this conversation before, whether we can move forward with input hearings without our technical expert. These two individuals, Mr. Johnson and Ms. McDonald, have, as I understand it, we have access to just simply gather the data. So we're not talking about a partisan issue, or we're not talking about them for map drawing purposes, at least for possibly 2 weeks in March if you wanted to move forward quickly on the input hearings, or at a minimum starting April 1 for at least the month of April. That's all I'm talking about, not through the rest of the potential input hearings for May. Or even the map drawing. That's not what I'm suggesting. It's just it was an alternative that we could move forward with a technical expert who could help us, and then immediately turn that information over to the individual who was awarded the contract. But again, we don't know when we're going to be able to run these dates to give an award. And I mean, what if by chance this is pushed 2 weeks and we don't have a technical expert in the middle of April? That's a strong possibility. And so all I'm saying is that this is an alternative where we might be able to get a technical expert for gathering data only for the month of April, or moving it forward 2 weeks in March.
Okay, so largely it is a stopgap measure. All that data that would get collected, and again, it may be limiting some of what's actually in the contract, but it will ultimately be turned over to the consultant, and therefore, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner Yao.
Attempting to integrate the thoughts of Commissioner Dye and also Commissioner Antai in his proposal, if I can refer everybody to the page 18, the summary proposal. what I would recommend that we pass today is to pass item number 1, item number 2, item number 3, the first part of 4, not approve the second part of item 4, which is labeled conduct, $104,000. Approve the conference call, approves the educational video for a total cost of about $70,000. I think there's enough flexibility to have Mr. Rob Wilcox to work with CCMP and allow us the flexibility of getting going so that we don't lose any part of the schedule. And I think the $60,000 would be an attempt to compensate CCMP for the efforts that they have done and also start proceeding on these tasks without us losing any schedule. Anything else can be considered as a separate option, but at the minimum, I would like to see us approve these items.
Clarification, Commissioner Yao, were you suggesting that in the form of a motion?
I will motion that, yes. Yes, I will make that motion to, actually, I would much prefer to have Commissioner Antai to make that motion. This is coming from his outreach committee, if he agrees with it. If he doesn't, then I will not make this motion.
I like the thought. Before I answer that, can I get some response from CCP?
Yeah, I wanted to address a couple of things. One, I'm sure you've heard it before, but as a state agency, we have DGS rules over our contracts, and so any subcontract can only be 25% of the total, and that would mean that we couldn't pass through any other money to any other vendor if we used all of that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. We can't. There's no wiggle room with that. It's actually $50,000 or 25%, whichever is less. More, right? Less, okay. The second thing is I agree with, in response to Commissioner Yao's suggestion, I think it's a good step forward, and it is direction that we would need. I just want to retain some flexibility around rethinking. I can't commit today that these numbers are exactly, it's like now that these new things are coming, I'd want to rethink the structure of the educational video, the structure of the toolkit, but in principle, I agree, if that makes sense.
So, Commissioner Dye, feel free, we asked CCP to respond. I'd like Commissioner Ontai to be able to respond to the question that he posed, and then Commissioner Dye.
Yes, and before I do that, can I get some comments from Dan?
Yes, and the only comment, first of all, on the structuring of our contract for the competitive bid that Commissioner Anchetta referred to, that's still at DGS, and they're still considering the language. We can change those components to allow this process if we were to use the Rose Institute and Q2 to provide this data for us as we go forward into March. The only other thing I would say is, if we're not going to meet again earliest until 17th, 18th, and 19th of March, and if this is going to be considered as a possibility, then this commission has to consider leaving some money in to schedule workshops with to accommodate the input meetings in this budget. That's my only thought.
So I think Commissioner Ontai has the floor.
Yeah. So, Sarah and Charlotte, you're not prepared to give us at least a ballpark figure?
I just would, every single thing that you see in this document, we have been 3 people have been working more than full time for the past 3 weeks on really thinking through and questioning our assumptions at every step of the way. Is this the best quality product we can possibly suggest, given our professional judgment, at the least possible cost for the least possible, hours, for example? So, given how much your approach has shifted, I just don't think we'd be doing anyone a service to to not go back and really think it through again. Now, the one other thing I just wanted to point out is in Commissioner Yao's suggestion, it did not suggest including any money to conduct one workshop. So you need to think about whether or not you do want to conduct one that would help, so you would have, like real people in the background of your video. That's one thing to think through. And the other thing I just want to comment on is in the unit cost for the workshops, within our assumptions, there are certain things that you use over the course of all of your workshops, and so we divided those costs by 9. So if we only did one workshop, I need to go back and revisit the numbers because those could also shift. Do you follow me? And the other thing I'd say is in the 16,128 of the preparation, we would no longer be preparing for 9 workshops, and therefore we need to revisit all those assumptions too, because we're not going to do work that isn't appropriate.
Okay, and on that one particular workshop that we do, and it might be the end of March, working with Rob, so we get a quality piece that we can use. Not 6 hours, but maybe 2 or 3. You're going to have to work that out with Rob. You're going to put that in there as well. All right?
Sure, we can.
So can you get something to us tomorrow?
We're running your session tomorrow.
Yeah, we have a 9-hour day tomorrow that we're facilitating.
We need to go back and check in with all
But you guys
those
are super women.
Commissioner Anta, I have several commissioners in the stack. Commissioner DiGiulio?
Originally, I had wanted to make a comment on Commissioner Filkins-Weber's motion, but I would like to see if I can reserve that till later so we can finish this conversation. Is that parliamentarily acceptable? Something along those lines. Let me just put
a motion on the table.
Well, I meant for the discussion. Okay. But in terms of what we're discussing right now, do we still have that March 3rd, 4th meeting? Has it been completely eliminated? Okay, because that was the other option. I thought maybe I just don't see how CCP can come back to us with numbers at any time soon. So that was the only other thing related to that.
Thank you. Commissioner Dye?
Yeah, I was going to suggest, rather than trying to line item this out, is to come up with a not to exceed number that we all feel comfortable with, and maybe that's 70,000, maybe it's 100, because I would really like to give Rob an opportunity to sit down with them to talk about this, and then give them enough latitude to be able to work this out and decide, does doing one workshop make sense? Because as you pointed out, the costs may make this not make sense, and we may just want to spend all of our resources in doing a 5-minute video and move on to letting them start with the public input piece of it. Now this, I see that you don't actually have the budget number yet for the public input hearings, and so that was going to come later anyway. My suggestion is that we just, if we feel comfortable, approve a not to exceed number instead, with giving our Director of Communications the discretion to work out the details and determine whether it's going to be a lot lower than that or whether he needs their assistance to get up to that.
So I would like to just note the time at this point. We're a little bit after 3:30. We still have an advisory committee report back from our Public Information Committee. We have a training on Bagley-Keene and a couple other smaller business matters to attend to. So getting to a motion on this item would be very desirable. Commissioner Blanco.
I want to address Commissioner Filkins-Weber, but I think we should put to rest the issue of the contract for the outreach workshops first, unless they're related. If not, okay, yeah, then I'll reserve my spot like Commissioner DiGiulio.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber and then Commissioner Aguirre.
Ladies, if you don't feel comfortable even doing a ballpark, as Commissioner Anta had suggested, how could we even come up with a not to exceed number? Really, when there's a big difference. I mean, you add these up, it was 70, but we know that the 16 grand's going to come down significantly since you're telling us it includes 9, but it was just my thought process.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Yeah, I think that we need to, we don't want to belabor this any further. So I would move that I like your idea, that we award the contract with not to exceed $100,000.
I second that.
Could I ask to have the motion restated?
The motion is to award the contract for CCP not to exceed $100,000. And do you want the individual items listed in the motion that we're hiring them for?
No.
No. Okay. No. Then the award to award the contract for CCP not to exceed $100,000.
And may I make a friendly amendment to that motion? And that friendly motion will be friendly amendment to the motion.
We did. I heard a second. Can I confirm who made the second?
I did.
Okay. Thank you.
And that the consultants come back and request additional funds upon demonstrating a need for it.
Commissioner Aguirre, would you entertain that? Would you be willing to amend your own motion?
Sure. Yeah, it's demonstrate a need. Yes.
Would you still be willing to second
Absolutely.
that motion? Excellent. So could we open the floor for discussion on this motion? Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. This number would include the potential to do input with 2 subcontracts. Then what contract specifically are we awarding the $100,000 for? That's
So
what I've been clear on.
I'd like to defer that back to the commissioner that made the motion, Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, we're working with this budget, which does not include that. So.
What does it include?
Please
I
see
thought we
page
eliminated that.
18 of CCP's documents.
I'm looking at it. I thought that was for educational workshops that we
This was
aren't
to
having.
cover what's going to replace educational workshops. It's the alternative to that activity.
And there are many of these items that are not the educational workshops. The educational workshops is essentially one of 5 different components on this budget that we have.
I see this as the adjunct to our public awareness campaign, basically, which is why I suggested that our Director of Communications work with them on this.
Additional discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I invite any members of the public to come and comment on this motion.
If I may, Doug Johnson from the Rose Institute. Just a question clarifying, there was discussion earlier about possibly holding a public input session in March. If you're not meeting until March 17th, there won't be time to vote at that point and hold it in March. So is part of this motion the direction for them to set that meeting up if Rob signs off on that, since they seem to be coordinating with them? Or how does this motion relate to the possibility of moving the meetings up into March?
Commissioner Aguirre?
I think that if we could include it, I think that would be a good idea. I'm not sure whether Rob's thinking that it's possible, but we could always schedule one in terms of being able to assess the possibility of holding one, and then if it doesn't work, then it's easier to cancel.
And I heard that this is an input meeting to be held. To be held. So I guess my question is, because I have heard some certain conversation with commissioners questioning whether you have the ability to be able to do that and have the expertise, and if you wanted to do an input here.
Just procedurally, I wanted to clarify, we had opened it up for a public comment. We had a clarification that came out of that public comment, but discussion did close on this item. So at this point, pardon? I would actually like to move to a vote at this point. We have been for well over 2.5 hours discussing this agenda item, and I think we do have a fairly clear motion on the floor. So I'd like to do a roll call on this vote, please.
Clarification, please. Was there an amendment to your motion that included the authority to plan a meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the amendment was by Commissioner Ontai, right?
I'm sorry. I had procedurally you had agreed to amend your own motion. Yes.
Not for an input meeting.
No.
You adopted Commissioner Ontai's amendment to your motion.
Yeah, and that was my amendment was up to $100,000, and the amendment was that CCP could come back to demonstrate need for additional. So.
That's correct. Would you like it reread?
I think I'm clear. Does anyone else need it reread?
Yeah.
Is there a clarification? Yeah.
I believe, Commissioner Geary, you did say that it included. Public comment was given, and you'd said that it did include, the 100,000 did include potential input meeting planning by CCP.
Yeah.
Is that not true, or is that,
Yeah.
I just don't know?
No, I'm reversing that. Yeah.
You're reversing, okay.
I'm
So it
holding
does.
to the original. So.
Okay. Thank you. So at this time, do you mind repeating the motion just for clarity?
The motion is that the contract be awarded for CCP not to exceed $100,000, and that the consultants may request additional funds with demonstrated need.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll do roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Filkins-Weber? No. Commissioner Forbes?
No.
Commissioner Galambas-Malloy?
Yes.
Commissioner Ontai?
Yes.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Raya?
No.
Commissioner Ward?
No.
Commissioner Yao?
No.
Commissioner Aguirre?
Yes.
Commissioner Anchetta?
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco?
Yes.
Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
9 yeses, 5 noes. The measure, or the motion passes.
Is this motion subject to the special requirements? And if so, how do we?
Mm-hmm.
Time for staff. I don't know.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Mr. Miller,
Well,
please.
I'm contemplating. It seems to me that the Commission had previously voted to retain the same consultants that are the subject of this motion. Is that correct? And that this would just be an amendment to the form of the agreement pursuant to which they were retained?
Let me clarify. At our last meeting, we directed staff to establish a short-term interagency contract with CCP for provision of civic engagement activities to support the CRC's first statewide input hearing on February 26, 2011, which is tomorrow, which is different than the scope of the proposal that we had currently been considering. However, as I understand this, need for the supermajority would apply to staff and consultants. The question is, how does that relate to interagency partnership agreements?
Well, I don't think it is different whether it's an interagency agreement or other parties, because the statute doesn't make that distinction. And I don't have a basis to advise that it would be different for interagency than for other third parties.
Thank you. So, in that case, it appears that our Janice, are you doing the calculation?
Yes, there's 4 Democrats. This is the yes votes. 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 3 declined to state. Short 1 Republican.
Short Republican.
Yep. Okay. All right. Commissioner Ward.
Thanks. I'd just like to see if we could just spend 5 more minutes on it. My biggest problem is I'm unclear as to what it was what it was that was included in that money, and I feel like it just got cut without a clear understanding of what it is we're contracting them to do. And I feel like if we could flush that out, we might have a result that bears action.
So what I would like to suggest is that commissioners who voted no on this, if you have particular areas of concern or areas that need clarification, to voice those, and in particular, if you have a motion to suggest, that would be gladly entertained. Commissioner Yao.
A simple statement of work. It appears that the proposal that was submitted to us were itemized, and the only portion that we were removed based on my original proposal was just the conduct of it. And that would allow the consultant money to continue going until we reach a decision on the input meeting or any other meeting that's follow on. But when we increase the funding above and beyond what was itemized by the proposal by $30,000 without a given statement of work, it's a gift of public fund, and I simply can't afford to vote on that.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
I certainly concur, especially when the individuals that are sitting before us cannot provide us even a ballpark. So we have, and now we're providing, a not to exceed when, as far as I understood, and you upped at $30,000. So that's my stake of my vote, and based on the present motion, it will remain.
So it sounds like we might be able to come to better agreement on a number that reflected this total amount on page 18, the 174,891.76 minus the 103,955.76 that was for the conduct of the actual educational workshops. Commissioner Yao?
The conduct of the first meeting, whether it's an input meeting or a outreach meeting, will not need to happen until the next time we meet. So if we want to take time out to address that one meeting separately, then I think we have something that we can move forward on. Unless you want to take time out to address that right now, today, without any cost input. So I'm continue to push to approve the original statement of work, assuming that staff will adjust the work scope accordingly within that funding. But if that's impossible, then I don't know where to go from there.
Commissioner Dye.
Yeah, the reason that I'm assuming Commissioner Aguirre raised the amount, and the reason I seconded his motion is to give a little flexibility, because, if Mr. Wilcox and CCP were to determine that it does make sense to move forward with one prototype workshop, they had indicated that their costs would actually increase since they had originally divided them among 9. So the reason it was higher was simply to give them some flexibility to come up with a scope of work that made sense. I actually would fully expect that and trust that Mr. Wilcox, would be able to figure out where CCP can best add value and augment his communications plan. So they might come in well under it. I just wanted to leave enough, flexibility in there in case they decide to go that route. I personally don't know if there's need to do one of these in-person workshops at all. I personally think that we should devote the money to doing a really good video, but that's my personal opinion. If they were to, after discussion, come up with a different determination, I wanted to leave them the flexibility to do it.
Thank you. Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, and the spirit of the motion was to provide flexibility, but specifically to really put this in the lap of our communications director, who really should be driving, this car. But anyway, the idea of the educational workshop was something based on demonstrated need, which would be developed in collaboration between Mr. Wilcox and CCP. That we're not awarding $100,000. If they determine in consultation that it's going to take $19,000, it's going to be $19,000. So, but if it's true that that the cost based on the assessment by our communications director indicates that the figure is going to be higher than or up to $100,000, then I think that's they move forward with it. My other point is this. Is that after 2.5 hours of debate, we got other issues to get into, so I just thought, let's put this baby to rest, because, we have the flexibility and we have an abstract limit on how much money could come, but that abstraction is going to be based on a real assessment by our communications director.
Mr. Miller.
I'm not sure if I'm adding clarity or not to this, but I'm not certain that our previous conversation was understood in the same way. So I just want to make sure that this is the case. Mm-hmm. The question I thought I was answering is, do the special majority provisions apply to CCP as they would to any other contractor? And the answer to that is yes.
Thank you. So that was our understanding, and that's why we moved on, assuming that last motion had not passed. So are there other commissioners who have a proposal to put on the table or a comment that might lead us to that? Ms. Wilkins-Weber.
In looking at this further, we do need to make a decision, because otherwise we don't have any contractors to help us. So I'm just a little hesitant in $100,000, because as our guests and experts had pointed out, if you just do the math and we're down to 70, and their suggestion is that it could even be lower. So although I'm not making a formal motion, I would like to entertain the other vote. Other commission members have voted against it, whether they would be more inclined for fiscal responsibility to just do the math and consider a possibility of a not to exceed 70,000, even though I certainly understand your consideration of providing them some room with working with Mr. Wilcox, but I don't see us moving up. I see us moving down, and based on what they had said, that some of these numbers will diminish. I think it's going to be a lot easier for them to come back to us and say, we're completely out of the ballpark because Mr. Wilcox has sent us up a different road, and now we're at 100,000, or we're at 75 or 80. So if we could be a little more fiscally responsible, I might be more inclined to consider an alternative motion in that regard.
Mr. Claypool and then Commissioner Ward.
And I just have to ask for clarification. Are we not, we're no longer then considering using the other plan to have input meetings in March? That this is taking that off the table, because this is the vehicle. Some vehicle is going to have to drive that, and it's going to have to involve planning and some type of budget. So I'm just confused.
My understanding is that that's not off the table, but what we're deciding on is the contract for how to do educational outreach for the commission, and we're going to separate that from the discussion on input.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. I think in hearing all the debate, I agree with Commissioner Wilkins-Weber that we need to do something. I think I would be more comfortable with whatever number if we have some control in it from the standpoint of the outreach committee and the chair independently, have to approve whatever the communication director, and just something where there's two different checks on that plan before the money's obligated. Then I'd be comfortable and ready.
Commissioner Forbes.
Yes, I also was a no vote, and my concern was the fact I wasn't quite sure what I was buying for the 100,000. I have a much more comfortable feeling with what I'm buying for the 70,000. And in my just item 4 does contemplate continued preparation for the potential of having an input meeting in March. But so I'm much more content with the $70,000 number because I know what I'm getting, and I'll move that.
I'll second that.
We approve a $70,000.
Thank you. Can we have Janice restate the motion, and then I would like clarification. I see a hand from CCP and a hand from Mr. Claypool.
The motion is to award the contract for CCP not to exceed $70,000, and the consultants may request additional funds with demonstrated need.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure everyone's clear what Charlotte said earlier about the DGS rule of the 25% or $50,000, whatever is less. So in the case of $70,000, Dan kindly did the math, and that would be $17,500 that could hypothetically be available for subcontracting. And we haven't circled back around to it, and I don't know if you want to today, but if you want us to subcontract for the video to get going and start all that, then
As we proposed.
which is what we've proposed.
Or it wouldn't be any additional work other than the quote is for what we proposed before today.
Exactly.
For the video. So it wouldn't be any additional videos, or it was only 4 10-minute videos.
Right, which you could have be on one DVD. I just wanted to point out that right now would be $17,000, and I don't know what you want to do about technical experts as far as Karen McDonald or Doug Johnson, but if you want us to make the toolkit, we also need technical assistance to create the pieces that a number of you have been very articulate that it's important you have that input. So I just want you to, those are all the things I'm thinking about. How will I deliver for you?
Yeah. That's our concern, is that it's, we aren't looking at the whole picture, I guess, is giving us some concern.
Mr. Claypool, Commissioner DiGiulio, and then Commissioner Yao.
Actually, I was just getting up to get water, and so you mistaken. It's the first time I haven't had anything to say.
Well, I'm sure we all have things to say. So, Commissioner
Can I
DiGiulio.
just suggest that we do this proposal and separate out the potential input, whether or not we'll need what form that will take, and maybe we could do another motion at another time in relationship to adding additional funds for CCP if the route we go. Is that a possibility? If we just look at this by removing the input discussion?
So you would get rid of item 4, which is where I see the input discussion coming from?
I think that there would need to be a lot of preparation regardless of the technical aspects for the input. I think when it says, number 4 says educational workshops, so that's the video, that's all the other things, and we do need to have some technical consultant with that, there's no doubt, but that's not an input right there, that's educational workshop.
I thought we converted it.
No.
Commissioner Yao.
Question for Mr. Claypool. Can we fund the video contractor directly? It seems like we are hung up on a technicality instead of the dollar amount, and to adjust the dollar amount to solve a technicality problem is not the right solution.
We can fund up to $4,999 on our authority. This is a $17,000 bill. So the other route would be to have it be part of a subcontract to CCP, but then we fall into the 25% under 50,000 rule.
So an additional $30,000, which was the original proposal, 25% of that doesn't sound like was adequate to cover the original outsourced cost anyway. So why is one prefer over the other?
Is that a question for me? Because I didn't make the proposal, so.
That sounds like you might be directing that at Commissioner Dye, who had made that motion.
Commissioner Dye, why?
My understanding is we can only contract for $4,999, so we needed to put the flexibility for CCP to subcontract, which is why we increased it by $30,000. Maybe we didn't explain that clearly.
No, the out of the extra $30,000, they can only spend 25% of that toward on the outside.
No, 25% of 100. Which
Right, but 25% of 100 doesn't cover both the video cost and the consultant cost, is what I heard. Is that not the case?
Should I make?
May I ask a point of clarification? What I think would be helpful is if you would be able to provide us with, again, a ballpark figure of what you anticipate the subcontracting needs based on what we have directed we want.
Okay. So if you look on page 18 in the middle of videographer. Okay. We have a figure for the main meat of it, which, page 18?
It says 18, but not 50.
On the back? Okay.
I'm looking at the wrong thing. This is what my page 18 looks like.
Oh, I'm sorry. We made a whole new. Okay. I'll use this. Okay. We made a new document for you today. I'm sorry. We never handed it out because we never really got to that point. Okay. It's all on here anyways. They really need to have this.
Yeah.
They need to have break.
Okay, at this point, we need to take a bio break. That will give you an opportunity to hand out your documents and for us to regroup. We are now going on to recess for 10 minutes. We will reconvene at 4:10.